You.
Let me give me another cup of coffee. I'll be right back.
Absolutely.
Is it just us?
Well, we'll see. I'm not sure yet. I don't remember if the Davises are going to be with us today or not. I know Paula's in Georgia.
Yeah, I saw your warning about the fiddle contest.
Yeah. So I changed the link. The Zoom had I had been just copying and pasting a previous webinar from Zoom, and so I changed the link. So I'm hoping people find their way to us today because I sent out the email. But if people have like, oh, this is the email I always go to click the link, then they may miss us. But you got the invitation obviously because you're here. So
Yeah,
all right,
I always just click the latest email because you
yeah.
just never know.
Well, we'll give Rob and Miller a minute or two just to see if they're getting on board, and if not, then it'll be the Dave and Tony show.
Yeah. Did you see? I don't think I sent you this. So Maurice got a job.
I
He's gonna be.
saw that on Facebook. How exciting! Or no, was it
Yeah,
on Facebook or you told me he was getting a job?
I think probably Facebook because I've been kind of incognito this last week or so. But there's a coffee shop opening in Homewood called Biddy and Bowes,
Yeah.
and they hire kids with intellectual disabilities.
Oh, that's awesome.
A lot of the kids have Down syndrome, and I remember the very first time I went to the Special Olympics as a volunteer when I was working in retail. We would go down and help out, and it's just so emotional for me watching those kids. And like and even though Maurice is really really high functioning, I always think about him as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And when they had like their group interviews, I actually saw him as part of a community, and I just lost it. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was really, really emotional for me. And so like he ended up he had actually did really, really well in the interview. And I kind of knew he was gonna get the job because they really seemed to like him. But they met over at Homewood Park on Friday to have that apron ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
And like there was this one girl, she was just it was a surprise for him. But like when they announced her name, she was like she was just the joy that that child had. Like there wasn't a dry eye in the it was amazing.
Oh man, how
Yeah, so
wonderful. Well,
so no more Starbucks. I'm going to Biddy and Bowls when they open.
I'm gonna have to go there on make a special trip. That's awesome.
Katie told me about Biddy and Bose on Friday, and then I saw on Facebook.
Who told you?
Katie Gilbert.
Oh, Katie told you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Angela said that one of her friends told her about Biddy and Bose on Friday. So that's I'm excited to hear that
Yeah,
they're
they
gonna have
have
that
12
going.
locations. In the
Oh.
stores actually named after their kids,
Hmm.
Biddy and Bo, and they have 12 locations in Birmingham. The inaugural cruise should start right before Thanksgiving. So,
That's so neat. That's so neat.
Big.
Good morning, Miller.
hey Miller,
Good morning.
It's good to see
Oh,
you.
good to see you too. Dragging a little bit.
I understand.
y'all like my
Rob
cup?
is oh
That's amazing.
yes. Be the unicorn. Rob's not gonna be joining us.
Okay.
He is dragging a bit. We finally found a COVID booster on Thursday,
Hmm.
and I think it's hitting him today. So
That it took me out for a weekend last weekend. I mean, I was not worth much on Saturday after I got my
I
booster.
need to get
that's
one, but I don't
it.
want to ruin my week. I don't want to ruin my weekend. I might
I
do
know
it.
that's the challenge, isn't it? I mean, some people don't have any problem, but most of who I've talked to, it's like, yeah, I'm gone the next day. So yeah. Well, then it's probably it didn't bother Angela. Okay.
But shingles and tetanus.
Yeah.
Mm,
If
yeah.
if the COVID doesn't get you, the shingles and tetanus will get you. So that'll take you out. Well, so if it's just the three of us, why don't we go ahead and split up roles then? Um Tony, do you mind being the liturgist?
Sure, why not?
Miller, can you be voice of the people?
Sure.
And then I will take the Old Testament reading, and then Miller, can you take the New Testament reading?
Sure.
All right. And I think that's all the roles. Okay.
Let me log
All
into
right.
Facebook.
Yeah, thank you. I've got YouTube up. So if you're streaming from Facebook or YouTube, welcome. This is St. Junia United Methodist Church. This is our online version of house church. Feel free to participate because house church is participatory, so we love having conversation. And when it comes time for prayer requests, invite you to share prayer requests too. Also, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please just click like or type a comment with where you're watching from. That gives us a record that you were with us. Glad to have you today. So once you get logged into Facebook, Tony, I'll go ahead and get the liturgy up so you can start.
Okay, we're good to go.
All right. And pardon the typos. I'm sure there's some in there somewhere.
Jesus Christ. Okay. On October 29th, 1863, 18 countries met in Geneva, Switzerland, and formed the International Committee of the Red Cross. In 1949, as a part of the Geneva Convention, it was given an international mandate to care for victims of armed conflict. On this day in 1390, the first trial for witchcraft began in Paris, France. Jean de Bric was condemned and executed by burning. Witch trials reflected not only patriarchy, but also Christian supremacy and brutal treatment of people accused of witchcraft would continue to stain the witness of the church for several centuries in Europe and the lands it colonized. October 31st marks All Hallows Eve, the night before All Hallows Eve or All Saints Day. All Saints Day on November 1st has historically been about those who have died as champions of faith or as martyrs. And All Souls Day, November 2nd, memorializes all followers of Jesus. Both are observances of the great cloud of witnesses surrounding us all. The Mexican Day of the Dead incorporates indigenous and Roman Catholic elements of honoring ancestors, and it occurs during the season. Halloween developed as a folk tradition on the night before All Saints Day, All Hallows Day. Like Carnival, Mardi Gras, or Fat Tuesday, it was a harvest celebration with masks and parades, and the combination of non-Christian elements with fear of pagan or demonic influence led to more recent condemnation of Halloween by fundamentalist churches. And also in 2004, this was the day I became a grandfather.
Awesome.
Greetings, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
as beloved ones.
as blessed ones.
Draw near and let us break the bread of life.
Our responsive reading today comes from Psalms 90, verses 1 through 6 and 13 through 17. A prayer of Moses, the man of God.
Lord, you have been our help, generation after generation.
Before the mountains were born, before you birthed the earth and inhabited the world.
From forever in the past to forever in the future, you are God.
You return people to dust, saying, "Go back, humans."
Because in your perspective, 1,000 years are like yesterday past.
Like a short period of like a short period during the night watch.
You sweep humans away like a dream, like grass that is renewed in the morning.
True, in the morning it thrives, renewed, but come evening it withers and all dried up.
Come back to us, Lord, please, quick. Have some compassion for your servants.
Fill us full every morning with your faithful love so we can rejoice and celebrate our whole life long.
Make us happy for the same amount of time that you afflicted us.
For the same number of years that we saw only trouble.
Let your acts be seen by your servants.
Let your glory be seen by their children.
Let the kindness of the Lord our God be over us.
Make the work of our hands last.
Make the work of our hands last.
Our Hebrew Bible reading comes from Deuteronomy chapter 34, verses 1 through 12. Then Moses hiked up from the Moabite plains to Mount Nebo, the peak of the Pisgah slope, which faces Jericho. The Lord showed him the whole land, the Gilead region as far as Dan's territory, all the parts belonging to Naphtali, along with the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, as well as the entirety of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, also the arid southern plain, and the plain including the Jericho Valley, Palm City, as far as Zoar. Then the Lord said to Moses, "This is the land that I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I promised I will give it to your descendants. I have shown it to you with your own eyes. However, you will not cross over into it." Then Moses, the Lord's servant, died, right there in the land of Moab, according to the Lord's command. The Lord buried him in a valley in Moabite country across from Beth Peor. Even now, no one knows where Moses' grave is. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyesight wasn't impaired, and his vigor hadn't diminished a bit. Back down in the Moabite plains, the Israelites mourned Moses' death for 30 days. At that point, the time for weeping and for mourning Moses was over. Joshua, Nun's son, was filled with wisdom because Moses had placed his hands on him. So the Israelites listened to Joshua, and they did exactly what the Lord commanded Moses. No prophet like Moses has yet emerged in Israel. Moses knew the Lord face to face. That's not even to mention all those signs and wonders that the Lord sent Moses to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh, to all his servants, and to his entire land, as well as all the extraordinary power that Moses displayed before Israel's own eyes.
Matthew 22, 34 through 46. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had left the Sadducees speechless, they met together. One of them, a legal expert, tested him. "Teacher, "What is the greatest commandment in the law?" He replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. You must love your neighbor as yourself, or as you love yourself. All the law and the prophets depend on these two commands." Now, as the Pharisees were gathering, Jesus asked them, "What do you think about the Christ? Whose son is he?" "David's son," they replied. He said, "Then how is it that David, inspired by the Holy Spirit, called him Lord when he said, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right side until I turn your enemies into your footstool?' If David calls him Lord, how can he be David's son?" Nobody was able to answer him. And from that day forward, nobody dared to ask him anything. May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be
Thanks
to
be to
God.
God. In a letter to Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau wrote, "Death is beautiful when seen to be a law and not an accident. It is as common as life. Every blade in the field, every leaf in the forest lays down its life in its season as beautifully as it was taken up."
So we will move into a time of prayer. Thank you all for getting us started in worship. If you are watching on streaming on Facebook or YouTube, if you want to lift up a prayer request while we pray, feel free just to put it in the chat. If you're on Zoom, you can do the same thing. Let's go to God in prayer. God, creator of the world and sustainer of all people and all life, we give you thanks that you bring us to another day, that you carried us safely through the night, that we are conscious today and able to enjoy the beauty of the world around us. Help us first to open our eyes and pay attention to the blessings that are all around us. People we love, food, shelter. And even as we become aware of those things, we are aware of all those who are without those things, especially in places that are torn by conflict, places where people didn't necessarily make it through the night. We lift those people up to you, those who are living in terror, those who are living with worry, whether they'll make it from one day to the next. God, in all the terror and beauty, you unite us as one people. We realize that we are all mortal, that we have a limited amount of time. Help us, God, to make the most of that time, so that when we die, we can die with confidence and at peace. God, help us also to see each other as brothers and sisters, as siblings, all made in your image. Help us to help others lay down the weapons of war and to participate in the work of justice and healing. We lift up to you people in situations who are close to us and ask for your special presence and blessing, and invite those of you who are listening to share your prayer concerns. And I'll keep an eye on YouTube. If Tony, if you'll keep an eye on Facebook. And Miller, if you can look at the chat.
Or peace between Israel and Palestine.
Lord,
Lord,
hear our
hear our
prayer.
prayer.
For caregivers,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for my mother-in-law, Barbara Billups,
Lord, hear our prayer.
For all those facing tough choices,
Lord, hear our prayer. For those struggling due to work actions, that issues be resolved and everyone find employment.
Lord, hear
Lord,
our
hear
prayer.
our prayer. For transgender children and adults.
Lord, hear our
Lord, hear
prayer.
our prayer.
For comfort for the people in Maine. Lord, hear our prayer. For those who have lost family and friends this year.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those struggling with life-threatening diseases.
Lord, hear our
Lord, hear
prayer.
our prayer. For inspiration and for new ideas to create peace and healing in the world.
Lord, hear our prayer.
God, for all those prayers that we've named and those that are unnamed, the prayers of our hearts, we give you thanks that we don't even have to speak them for you to hear them. And when we don't know what else to pray, God, we pray the prayer Jesus taught us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial, and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So before I dig into the passage in Matthew, I want to share a few things with you about how we read the Bible and how I first approach when I come to a passage, especially one that's as familiar as this, that says, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your being, with all your mind. This is the first commandment, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. I think probably if you've grown up in church, you've heard that. You may know that's the greatest commandment. So Jesus elevates that commandment far above any others. Everything.
Nobody does it though.
No, well, that's right. That's part of the problem, right? So, but when we hear that, I like to make sure that we kind of give it some context. So the first thing is, and it's important to say this, Jesus wasn't the first person to say this. There's a version of the golden rule in every major religion. Buddhism, Confucianism, and in Judaism, probably about 30 years before Jesus, Rabbi Hillel, there was a famous story about Rabbi Hillel that I love to share. A Roman came up to him and said, summarize the Torah for me while standing on one leg. Basically, I don't have time to hear the whole Torah and hear a bunch of theological explanation. I want you to boil it down for me in simple terms. And he had gone to other rabbis, and the other rabbis said, get out of here. I'm not, don't be insulting. You can't boil the Torah down to one statement. And then, of course, he comes to Rabbi Hillel, and Hillel stands on one leg and goes, what's hateful for you, don't do to someone else. That's the whole of the Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and learn it. Boom. Great story. So Jesus, I'm sure, who grew up in Galilee, which is where Rabbi Hillel operated, had heard that story. He knew that story. So when he's asked, he says exactly what he's learned. Right? I mean, and I know this is offensive to say that Jesus learned something, but to some people, but he was human, which means he learned things, right? And in Galilee, he grew up with Rabbi Hillel. He heard this story. Or at least he may have known Hillel for all we know. And so he says this, and everyone's like, of course, that's the right answer, right? So this text, this story comes from Matthew. I want to read you the story from Mark. So give me a second because it's in one of these many tabs that I have open. Okay, here it is from Mark. Now it's a little bit different. Okay. Now, same context in that Jesus is in the temple. There are a bunch of religious leaders around him. He's talked back to the Sadducees. He's talked back to different factions, and now he talks back to the Pharisees. And then Mark picks up the story this way. One of the legal experts heard their dispute and saw how well Jesus answered them. He came over and asked him, which commandment is the most important of all? Jesus replied, the most important one is, Israel, listen. Our God is one Lord, and you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your mind, and all your strength. The second is this, you will love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these. Listen to what happens next. The legal expert said to him, well said, teacher. You have truthfully said that God is one and there is no other besides him, and to love God with all of the heart, a full understanding, and all of one's strength, and to love one neighbor as oneself is much more important than all kinds of entirely burned offerings and sacrifices. When Jesus saw that this legal expert had answered with wisdom, he said to him, you aren't far from God's kingdom. After that, no one dared ask him any questions. Do you see how different that is? So in Mark, it's the same question, but it's done more as a peer-to-peer. A legal expert asks Jesus, what's the most important commandment? And he gives him the answer. And he says, yeah, well said. Good job. And I agree with you. And Jesus says, right on, buddy. You're not far from God's kingdom. So the Pharisee in this situation is on Jesus's side. That doesn't necessarily fit what Matthew wants to do, which is to show the Pharisees as the bad guys. Right? It's important to see this because so often when you hear Pharisee from the pulpit, what we hear is hypocrite, bad guy, someone who's on the wrong side, right? But not in this context. In this context, at least one Pharisee is on Jesus' side. Now, there's probably others. One of the reasons that's important is that so often in Christian churches, when we talk about Pharisees as being the bad guys, what we fail to understand is that is the ancestral lineage for rabbinic Judaism today. And every time we talk about Pharisees as hypocritical and legalistic, we're saying the same thing about Jews. So we need to understand when the Pharisees are presented in the Gospels, especially in Matthew's Gospel and often in John's Gospel, they are presented as a foil, right? Jesus was making an internal critique, just the way when we are talking about stuff and we're angry about Christians and church people, even though we're Christians and church people, you'll hear me talk about how frustrated Christians make me. It's an internal critique. I am a Christian. I am a follower of Jesus. And that's why church people drive me insane sometimes, especially when I hear them twisting things and distorting things. This is the same situation that Jesus is in when he's talking, when the Gospels talk about, he's talking about the Pharisees. Okay. And I think this is really important, especially in light of the conflict going on in the Middle East right now, when you hear rhetoric about Jews, especially when we realize that we have a strong strain of anti-Judaism within our tradition. We also have a strong tradition of colonization and white supremacy, which is also a place where we have, there's oftentimes among Christian people this idea that we got to support Israel no matter what, right? Israel's God's chosen people. And they conflate the story that we just heard about Moses, the Davidic monarchy, with the modern state of Israel. And therefore, any policy they have of building settlements or building walls or military action against other brown people, especially, a lot of white Christians just cheer that on, right? Because all brown people are terrorists in their mind. I want you to understand, like, this really gets to the heart of our faith, of what we believe, which is that we are supposed to love our neighbors as ourselves. And whatever kind of mandate or charter you think God gave to Israel, or whether you see that through a decolonization perspective and see Israel as invaders, the whole idea is you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself, because they're actually your sibling. We go all the way back to Genesis, with the first act of violence among siblings is primarily an act of religious violence. Cain was jealous of Abel. They both had different relationships with God, and Cain didn't like Abel's relationship with God, so he killed him. So that's how I read this text, especially in the time we're in right now, in this modern situation. We have one primary command, greater commandment than any other in the Bible, and that is to love our neighbor as ourselves, which automatically precludes killing somebody else, naturally. But beyond that, it means honoring that person, honoring guests. As you move through the whole sweep of the Bible, this is what constantly gets lifted up. Abraham is out in the middle of the desert, and strangers visit him, 3 strangers, and he welcomes them. And when he welcomes them, he winds up welcoming God. God's own self comes and has dinner with Abraham. Yeah, that's contrasted immediately with the visitors going to another city, and they're not welcomed. They're threatened as outsiders, and God destroys that city, right? Now, I don't think God destroys cities for not welcoming outsiders, but it might not be bad if he did sometimes in my angry moments, right? That this is primarily about how we treat guests, how we treat neighbors, how we treat foreigners who are also our neighbors. The whole sweep of the Bible is about this. There's no context in which this, what we're seeing today, gets the stamp of God's blessing. And there's a lot of ways for people to talk about it. And I have to be real careful as I talk about it, because all I got to do is sound like I'm favoring one side more than the other. And we got to recognize there's definitely a power imbalance, that Gaza is an open-air prison and has been so for decades, right? That is a form of violence, that people's poverty and suffering and trauma ongoing is a form of violence, right? That is violence. And also that massacring families in their beds is also violence. And whatever we think about how you end violence, this ain't the way. Like, this strategy doesn't work. Because I'm a mental health counselor, I often see people who are stuck in intractable conflict with spouses, with children, with extended family members, right? And with siblings. And part of the question that I ask them, and I try to be very delicate about this in a way that's empathetic, in a way that's listening to someone, is what you're doing working? Is this helping? And I don't know how many times, like, talking to couples where one is telling someone to shut up and the other one's saying, no, you shut up. And like, really, does that help? Does the other person get quiet when you tell them to shut up? You know, what does that help? And I think that's something that it's difficult for us to do, because we're caught up in the moment. Our fight and flight response is automatically, if someone attacks me, I'm going to attack them back, because part of me is about protecting my safety. Security and safety is such an important thing. And when we're dealing with multiple generational trauma, seeking safety is such an important thing. And what we see in the Middle East is, as we've seen in the United States, if I enact violence to secure my safety in a social situation, that doesn't work. That may work in the tribal world, where a bear's attacking you and you kill the bear and then you survive. That's great. But in the social world, in a complex social world, we're going to hurt them to secure our safety. Never works. It never works. So I feel like it kind of throws us back on this verse, loving your neighbor as yourself. That's the only thing that works. I don't want to cast this as a virtuous thing. This is a practical thing, right? Loving your neighbor. It's not like, oh, I'm a good person because I managed to gin up some love for my neighbor. Oh, I got a warm feeling in my heart. Oh, look what I. No, this is the only thing that works. And when I think about the solution to all the things that we face, climate change, mass violence, generational trauma, the only thing that works is loving your neighbor as yourself. And I'm seeing this as a practical thing, not a virtue. The reason it's a command is because this is the only thing that works. That's what I got for you today. The last little bit where Jesus asks them this question about David's son, that's a little rhetorical flourish that I think probably made sense to early Christians, but it's basically a kind of a random theological point. And I don't think it really adds anything to the passage, but I think that it's there because it was important for those early Christians. Look how Jesus shut them up. You notice it's in Matthew. It's not in Mark. There we go. I'm done talking for now.
This week I one of my newer coworkers shadowed me, and we actually went to St. Paul AME Church in Montgomery, where it was Rosa Parks' home church, and I met their pastor. And we're having this conversation. We're talking about how people view things through their own lens. I often say that people view things through their crap stained glasses because people they view frozen. Oh, there you go. Uh,
Yeah,
because
I was
because
for a minute.
because we all bring our past trauma, our past history, our past lives into everything that we talk about. I was talking about how my brother's birthday is September 20th, and every year I post about his birthday, and invariably, the majority of the people who comment on that post are always like, "Oh, well, I'm praying for you." I'm like, this is not a sad post. Like, me and my brother had fun. Like, we were hellions. Like, we had a great time. I'm just remembering, but people take their own trauma and then they kind of color your life, your experiences with it,
Mhm.
which I wish people would just stop doing. When you
Mhm.
first started talking about the passage, I didn't really think about the fact that there's a air of arrogance that we have that we don't really want to admit or acknowledge
Mhm.
when it comes to love. So, like, when you talk about how that love is the greatest commandment, it's amazing to me how people will turn that into a way to hate people.
Mhm.
Example, let's just talk about the queer community, for instance.
Yeah.
Those right-wing conservatives was like, well, y'all are going to hell because we're trying to love y'all, we're trying to love this. That ain't love.
Mhm.
Like, not that is not love. Because they were like, well, God wants us. Well, you let God do that. God didn't tell you to do that.
Right.
Yeah, I want to find one person who God actually speaks to. And I hate it when preachers tell it, but God ain't told you nothing.
Mhm.
Just stop that. Just stop.
Right.
Especially when it comes to hurting people. Like, God has not told anyone to hurt anybody.
Mhm.
So, like, just stop lying on God right now. But like when they do that, they say, well, we're just trying to love you. Like, no, love me like God told you to love me. Love me like your sibling. He didn't tell you to love me like a parent. He
Right.
said love me like a sibling. And they just throw it on his ear and like, well, I'm just being a good Christian. No, you're not.
I
No, you're
want
not.
to I want to say I really like the way you frame that, Tony, because I think it is like even going back to the witch trials in the 1300s, those Christians who are burning those witches, like, oh, we know we love them because we're trying to save their eternal soul by burning their
By
flesh, right?
burning,
Like,
yeah.
right. So but it is that I'm presuming to love you as though I'm your parent, or as though I know what's best for you, and I'm going to do this to you because I love you. Like, nobody, if I'm loving someone as myself, I don't want anyone to do something to me to show their love for me, right? Oh, I'm going to cut off your arms to show my love for you. No, that's I just don't see that as being loving, right? That's
Yeah,
just
something don't sit right about
I
that.
think I
yeah.
think it's vital that like the most important thing about this passage is
Mm-hmm.
to go to the other passage where
Mm-hmm.
Jesus sort of defines his terms here. The like which is love and neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
if loving your neighbor is the most important thing, then we have to look at the the Good Samaritan, which is who's your neighbor? That was the big question.
Mm-hmm.
And he said,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, I love how like Amy Jo Levine defined the Samaritan as sort of like there was actually violence between Jews and the
Yeah.
Samaritans at some point. And so it's sort of like love this person who might be, in ISIS. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think is what she was the metaphor that she used. And and what it means to love them is to like
Mm-hmm.
bring them back from death, to give them life
Yeah.
where they would have definitely died, you know,
Right. Yes.
preserve
Preserving
their
their
human physical body.
yeah.
Yeah.
Preserving their lives. Like this is what it means to love is you see someone wounded, you save their lives.
But
Yeah.
adding to that though, like even when we think about, I really have been really, really fortunate, being gay, being HIV positive, and having a supportive family, like especially my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about the people who don't have that. But even the analogy I made earlier about loving people as your siblings and not your parents, even if you're a parent, the way that you're supposed to love your children is loving them as a sibling of God.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
like you parent one way, but then you love another way because like the love that you know what I'm saying, like it's the same love. Like
Mm-hmm.
God want if you're saying that you're giving your child this Christian love, the Christian love that you're giving your child is not the love of God as your parents. It is the love of your siblings. Like even though you're
Yeah.
the physical parent, you are still yet siblings in Christ. And I think people miss that boat a lot of the time.
Yeah. With because since we brought up parenting, I mean, and I brought it up earlier. There's a great analogy I have my coworker Paul Baki taught me that parents, you go through like these stages. You're the cop, then you're the coach, and then you're the consultant. So when kids are little, you're a rule enforcer, but then you transition to being this place where you're kind of cheering them on, teach them how to do things like, well, this is why we don't hit our brother, how to build relationships. And then when they become adults, you're a consultant. They're going to come back to you, and as a cop, you're always auditioning to be the coach. And as a coach, you're always auditioning to be the consultant. The idea is we're moving toward a relationship of peers. So yeah, when you're loving your child, right? The whole idea is I want to love them in such a way that when they're a full grown adult, they are my sibling. They're my peer, and I'm not talking down to them or vice versa. We're not oppressing each other. Yeah. I mean, I think that's such a central part of love is you're also loving the person in who they're becoming. Right.
Yeah.
So they're changing in front of your eyes. You continue to love them. I wasn't saying this with you in mind, Miller, but it just hit me as I was saying it.
Oh wow, I just thought about that.
So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm really happy to hear
yeah.
it. Yeah. And yeah, the knowing when that's not happening. I
Yeah.
really like Camille's quote down here. Chris once said that love is the nurturing of existence.
Yeah.
Definitely not like denying it or snuffing it out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think what you were saying, Tony, about that, I think that assumption, like I'm moving into a role where I am above you and I'm talking down to you instead of this being an egalitarian thing.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful that like you said, you've had supportive family and community and chosen family. So
For the most part, some people you have to cuss out along the way, but
that's
they'll be
right.
okay. The other thing I was going to talk about, when you mentioned the story of Cain and Abel, I never thought about it being religious violence
Mm.
until you said that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's amazing to me. Like so you do the whole religious violence thing, and then you think about how different like I love the fact that when the colonizers came here, somehow or another the indigenous people were savages because they didn't speak English.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's almost like the white supremacy is so arrogant that just because you don't speak my language, then you must be doing some intelligible gibberish and you don't really know anything. And like that whole colonization mentality, whatever was colonized, it's out and you have that mentality, and then who writes the history about it makes it the oppressed people's fault. Like even when you
Mm-hmm.
think about the conquistadors, you talk about Cortez and all those. Like when those Incas poured that hot gold down their throat, somehow or another the Incas were supposed to be the bad guys. But y'all came to my house and killed my people, brought this disease, and somehow I'm the bad guy for defending myself.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, my spirit animal is Nat Turner. Nat Turner started that rebellion, and somehow or another, the enslaved people are the bad
Right.
guys because they were kidnapped, brought over here, and wanted to protect themselves.
Right.
You know, it is, and then the other part is then there's this whole like um you I cannot think of the word you used there, but it's like the false equivalencies.
Mm-hmm.
Like even when the when the colonizers tried to take over the White House 3 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
it was like, well, we're being oppressed. White people in this country ain't being oppressed. Like, why
Right.
y'all being oppressed then? Like,
Right.
somebody make that make sense for me. You
Yeah.
know, but somehow or another, they created this art that they feel like they need to push back against when it's really the people that you have oppressed who pull against who are pushing back against your oppression.
Right. Right.
And it's like we're always the victim. We're
Well,
always the victim.
yeah, and I think part of the question when we start talking about policy is like, how do I treat people as my neighbors? What do I want for someone else? Um, yeah, what is it that I want for other people to have? Do I want other people to have a voice? And in that situation, certainly not. I don't want this, I don't want the election to count, right?
No,
Or
not at
do
all.
what do I want? What do I want for other people? And
Certainly not what I have.
right. And I think that's part of what, like, if I love other people as myself, I want them to be housed. I want them to have adequate food and water. I want them to have the ability to participate in society. So I don't want there to be barriers in front of them so that they can't, overcome, like steps when there should be a ramp, right? I want people to be able to participate. So thinking about like what do I want for myself? And that should be what I want in terms of policy all the time. And admittedly, some of that's probably I think I'm frozen.
You're
Again,
moving slow.
my
You're catching
connection.
up though.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, I love the way that it compresses. Like I start talking really slow and then talk really fast. Um, but part of that is I think we have to ask ourselves, what do I want for myself? And then how do I make that policy for other people? Yeah.
I was on Facebook yesterday, and one of she's actually a younger friend. She's probably around the age of my son, but she made this comment about how it was like she had this epiphany. I think there's a lot of misogyny in the Bible. I'm like, really? You think?
Shocking. My
You think?
my.
And I was like, yeah, because it comes from patriarchy.
Yeah.
And I went on and I was and it actually was a good dialogue because people don't realize again, it's through our lens that we interpret things. You know, we talked about this when we had the whole story about the woman of the well, and that's what I told her. Like, let's vilify women. So you
Mm-hmm.
got this woman who has had several husbands, and somehow or another the Bible didn't say it, but somehow or another, she's a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
Women had no right. So if she's had five husbands, that means the five men have like, okay, I don't want you, I want to move on. Because had she cheated on them, she would have been stoned to death. So we
Mm-hmm.
know she didn't cheat,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
that's one way
then,
to read it. Absolutely. Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
but we put our crap stained glasses on, and of course, if
Mm-hmm.
she's had five husbands, she's got to be a whore. Like that's just
Mm-hmm.
what it has to be. And
Mm-hmm.
then you got this other man with you that's not your husband. So of course, you just sledding around town. But no one thinks about the fact that women can be alone and that you had to have an escort.
Right. Well, it could have been her brother.
Could have been a brother.
Right.
But
We don't
but
know.
but again, we put on those glasses like covered in crap, and all of a sudden we're gonna make her a bad person. Like
Yeah.
we have to stop doing that.
Yeah.
We have to stop doing that.
The one thing I love, the thing about this quote, like the way that Jesus distills it, is like it makes it so simple because technically there's to quote Britney Spears, there's two types of people in the world. There's God. We don't have there's nothing else distinguishing anybody. Like you have neighbors, you are a neighbor, and then there's God.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to think. I mean, you can't think less of a neighbor because that's the definition of equals.
Right. Right. Well, and I think even going back to like you're saying, so there's God and there's everyone else, and everyone else is made in the image of God. So you should treat them a certain way.
Right.
Like this
Well,
is, yeah.
Can we so Camille has a couple of great comments. I thought
Yeah.
Miller was gonna hit them. You want to do them, Miller?
I can, sure.
Go ahead.
Camille says, the hate between family members that leads to division and creates generational trauma seems to be the root of religious supremacy. It boils down to someone thinking they are God Daddy's favorite child and who will inherit the seat of power.
Yeah.
I heard from a Buddhist monk, Timber Hawkeye, that when we hear we are supposed to love your neighbor like you love yourself, doesn't take into account that a lot of people do not love themselves very much.
That's very true. So I do want to point out, like, a lot of this has to do, and we kind of alluded to this earlier, a lot of this has to do with family trauma, and that's in the Bible. Like Genesis is the whole story of mama loved you better, right? Or daddy loved you more. And, again and again, we see that repetition, and that there's a kind of, whoops, I just lost my light. That there's a kind of repetition of this cycle of generational trauma that sadly goes back to this idea that I'm not loved enough, and that I can't. It is hard for me to love myself because somewhere back in my past I didn't get the love I thought I deserved, right? And so I enact that trauma on other people.
Camille needs to go watch the Righteous Gemstones. Like that whole show is about family trauma.
You mentioned that. I got to go watch it. You're right. I need to watch that. Is it on HBO? What is that?
The House of Usher.
It's on HBO. Yeah.
Oh, The Fall of the House of Usher on Netflix too.
Yes.
So is
that's
that also
family trauma?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
I'm gonna to watch that. But the Righteous Gemstones is like that whole I'm Daddy's favorite. Like that is the whole theme throughout that whole show.
Yeah.
Is who can be Daddy's favorite.
Yeah. It goes way back. And then because I'm the favorite, I get the land. Or this land is mine. Yeah.
And I mean, I don't want to make this about me, but like with my relationship with my dad, I fully acknowledge, I think that was one of the things that made me realize what I had to do. Like, it's not about how he feels about me. It's about how he feels about himself,
Yeah.
I fully acknowledge that that's where this is coming from. His inability to acknowledge me is something, I mean, I don't know what his trauma was, but something.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Miller, a lot of it is just being a man in this society. Like, not saying that men are victim in any way, but like we have a lot of emotional trauma that's inflicted upon us that we don't count as emotional trauma. The fact that men are allowed to be emotional, the fact that men are told, well, you're supposed to be tough. You're not supposed to do this. That if that goes against your programming, it's like you get this weird loop thing going on. So like, I find that true with a lot of men in this society. Like, we were socialized not to feel. We were socialized almost not to care. I think that's why our health outcomes are so bad. I got a pain in my stomach. oh, well, you just a little whiny sissy because you know you should be able to handle this pain. And it's like, no, you're in pain. Go see what's going on. You know,
Yeah.
but by the time we get to the doctor, we got stage 10 cancer, and it's like, okay, what do I do? You know, and it's really sad. And I hope that he can find, you know, some type of healing for himself. Um, but like but then we end up going around hurting people
Yeah.
because of our hurt that society has thrust upon us. And again, not an excuse,
Mhm.
but that's probably where it comes from.
Right. Well, it's 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 that thing like we've said before. Like I really like the saying. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It was frozen. I didn't mean to talk over you. It's kind of like the idea that misogyny hurts women worse, but it hurts men first. Or I've heard different forms of that. That you know, racism hurts black people worse, but it hurts white people first, or whatever. The idea is, yeah, I mean, you have to cut off part of yourself. You have to diminish part of yourself to enact this kind of hatred. And I think that also ties back into the scripture a little bit. Like, you know, the idea is loving your neighbor is an aspect of loving yourself. You know, I mean, the whole idea of internalized toxic masculinity is, yeah, I can't be honest about my feelings. I have one acceptable emotion, and that's anger. You know, I can't be embarrassed because that's for sissies. I can't be sad or grieve or, you know, anxious. All that's for weak people. Anger is the only acceptable emotion.
Yeah.
And I see that affect guys a lot. And that is trauma. It is complex trauma, and it's repeated, keeps getting
And the
passed
older
down.
they are, the worse it is. I mean, I think
Mhm.
hopefully a lot of the young guys growing up now are going to feel like they can be a little bit more in touch with their emotions. But like our parents, grandparents, it's like, oh, like
Mhm.
I think about my grandfather. My grandfather worked in the plant, and on the weekend, he was a functional alcoholic
Mhm.
with some other issues, and it really takes my mom to talk about, you know, how violent he would be with my grandmother and her brother on the weekends when he would go out, get drunk, and come home just act the fool. But it was the oppression of having to work for these white people who treated you like crap,
Right.
you know, Monday through Friday, and you got all this rage built up in you that you don't know how to deal with. No one's taught you how to deal with. And, you know, then you treat your family crazy. There are a lot of people who did not like the color purple because they said it put black men in a bad light. I totally got the color
Mm.
purple. And even though the men in that movie were not like working in the plants, they still dealt with systematic racism and not being valued as a person first and
Mhm.
as a man second. And so they enacted violence upon their families. I, I know way too many people of my age group
Mhm.
who talk about how their grandmothers pretty much got all the kids, got on a wagon, and left like
Mhm.
just because they just could not endure it anymore. And again, not making an excuse for the people who enacted the violence upon them, but it was because of their trauma that they had no way to deal with that
Mhm.
they did these horrible things to their families. And sometimes we just have to take a step back, take a beat, and go,
Mhm.
okay, so that's why you're so hateful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't excuse your hate. It does
Right.
not excuse your hate.
Well, and I think that's a good encapsulation also of what we're seeing both in this country and in the Middle East, you know, which is that, yeah, what you see is a lot of trauma, a lot of people who haven't dealt with it very well, and you put them in a stressful situation, and just blows up.
Yeah.
Well,
I, the hypocrisy of America is always like laughable for me. Like
yeah.
we love going around telling people, you know, y'all are doing this to your people, you shouldn't do that. And they're like,
Mhm.
just try to be black in this in this country if
Yeah.
you want to. But
Yeah.
we totally ignore the racism that exists in America. And then we go and try to tell everybody else you're treating your people bad. We ain't fixed racism yet
Right.
and
That's
don't
true.
want to.
Yep. Well, I appreciate y'all digging into this passage with me. I mean, I think part of the thing. And by the way, made a mistake earlier. I said that the David quote doesn't show up in Mark. It does. It's just later, but still.
Oh, we got a comment.
Yeah.
Chris says we can't even talk to each other, men, without it being toxic. We actually were talking about this yesterday. What's up, dumbass? As acceptable greeting, and you're not allowed to actually speak with kindness. Yeah, because then you're a sissy, Chris.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, oh gosh, that was loud in my own ears. Thank y'all for being part of the discussion today and for digging into the text. I'm gonna go ahead and put the closing prayer up on the screen. Let's see if I can find it among all my open tabs. Here we are.
You are wisdom. Raise me, I pray, that I may wholly respond to your works, mysterious and inspired. There are God's secret matters lie. There, all God's secret matters lie, covered and hidden under darkness, both profound and brilliant, silent and wise. You make what is ultimate and beyond brightness secretly to shine in all that is most dark. In your way, ever unseen and intangible, you fill to the full. You fill to the full with most beautiful splendor those souls who close their eyes that they may see. And I please with the love, and I please with the love that goes on and on beyond mind to all that is beyond mind. Seek to gain such for myself through prayer. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
So thank you all for sharing worship with me today. Again, for those of you who are streaming, if you wouldn't mind just clicking like or commenting with where you've been watching from, that gives us a way to count you. Appreciate you being with us also. I'm going to stop the stream, and if you're on Zoom, stick around for just a minute more.